Welcome back to Business Matters here on the BBC World Service with me, Sam Fennick, and Christina Hooper, Chief Global Market Strategist at Invesco. Joining us today from New York City, and Stephanie Yuan Theo joins us from Singapore. She is the Managing Partner at TSMP Law. We're going to start this second half talking about women in the workplace, because the number of women working in the US has hit an all-time high. Last year, more than 3/4 of working-age women were in employment. Women have outnumbered men in earning college degrees since the early 1980s, but the rate of 25 to 54-year-olds in work has lagged behind men, and many economists expected them to have a slow post-pandemic return to work. So what's happened? Well, earlier I spoke to Alex Arnon. He is an analyst at the University of Pennsylvania's Penn Wharton budget model.
When we started looking at this question, we were very focused on the pandemic and the immediate aftermath of the pandemic and the recovery. The expectation was that given the nature of the economic effects, this would be particularly harmful for women. People expected to see a much slower and more painful recovery for women, many more constraints on their ability to return to work. That is not what we have seen. Women have recovered at a much faster rate into employment. There has been now a long-running trend since the early 2000s of women's employment rising at a faster rate than men.
So is there a specific age group which is pushing up that percentage?
Here we are talking about women in their prime working ages, which is 25 to 54. We have seen some increases in the share of older women who are working, but really that has not been happening for many years now. But really what we are talking about here is women in their prime working ages. And in particular, as we can go into, this is women at the ages when they're most likely to have children and become mothers.
So is the difference then that there's better childcare, more affordable childcare, or is it a woman's desire to work even though she has children?
So I think it is much more the desire to work even after having children, and some changes in the workplace that make it much more feasible for women to work after having children. I think it would be hard to make the case that there have been dramatic improvements in childcare availability or affordability in the US over the last few decades. I'd say most people think probably things have gone in the opposite direction and it's gotten harder. That does not seem like a likely explanation, increased access or ease of access to childcare. It is definitely much more motivation and interest among women in, pursuing careers that they will sustain even after they have kids. I think less clearly, but also we see some evidence for this, a mix of cultural and technological changes that just make it much more feasible to do that. A combination of, particularly in high status professions, lawyers, doctors, software engineers, bosses and employers are just recognizing that it's actually worth making accommodations for women to have real careers at your workplace. And then that plus the increasing availability of remote work and technology, even before the pandemic, but very much accelerating after the pandemic. It is just much easier now to work until 3 and then go pick up your kid and then come back and keep working the rest of the afternoon. That's something that can be done that for many jobs you just couldn't do 10, 20 years ago.
Now, there does seem to be a bit of an irony here that you are a man and that you've led this research into women in the workplace.
I am, in addition to being a man, a labor market analyst. So I'm just interested in what is driving the U.S. economy. And this is unambiguously one of the most important trends driving the U.S. economy and labor market over the last couple of decades. This question is of particular interest to women, but I think separate from that, it is also of tremendous interest just to those who want to understand the economy. A productive worker is a productive worker, regardless of whether they're a man, whether they have a kid. What we want to see is people who want to work being able to work.
That was labour market analyst Alex Arnon there. He is an analyst from the University of Pennsylvania's Penn Wharton budget model. Let's talk to Christina first. What do you think about that? So 3/4 now of the of women who could work are working, highest rate ever. Is it surprising? Should it be higher? Is it to do with childcare? What is it like in the United States being a working mom right now?
So I don't know if it's that surprising because I think it's a confluence of factors that have caused this to happen. Certainly the pandemic and this much greater increase in flexibility around being able to work from home sometimes, working flexible hours, also advances in technology. Things like Microsoft Teams enable you to conduct meetings remotely that are effective, where you're connecting with people. And then, of course, there's also another element to this story, which is the scarcity of employees. When you have more job openings than you have people to fill them, then employers become far more flexible, and the kinds of requirements that they impose on employees tend to go away, and they look for ways to accommodate employees so they can continue working. So I think it's all those factors, and that's created an environment where it's much easier for women. And quite frankly, it's not just women, it's parents and even pet parents. They're all benefiting from this in terms of just having a better work environment.
One thing that struck me about Alex's research is that it's women who have got college degrees are more likely to be in employment. And that they're the ones kind of pushing this. But we really do need to get those who maybe haven't got college degrees into work as well, don't we? So that they're able to stay in work and progress and earn for themselves and contributing to the economy.
Absolutely. But I have to say, unfortunately, for many that aren't in white collar jobs, there isn't as much flexibility. There is often more in the way of requirements to be physically present. There isn't that flexibility in hours. So that is a reality that hopefully there will be ways to overcome as technology advances.
Okay. Well, let's talk to Stephanie now in Singapore. What's women's participation in the workforce like in Singapore?
It's about 76%, whereas for the men it's 89%. So that's a high number, but the women consistently like the men. Among the OECD countries, Singapore ranks second for men's participation in the workforce, but only fourth for women. So we have a way to go. Part of the reason that we are getting better at this is, as Christina said, post-pandemic, there are more flexible work arrangements. That's understandable. The problem is we have 265,000 women. Now, Singapore is a very small country, remember. We have 265,000 women of working age who are not participating in the workforce. They're not working right now. We need to get them back. My worry is that on a longer-term basis, these women will continue to be the laggards in their households. They will continue to suffer from gender inequality more, and that's going to lead to negative consequences. Even if you have flexible work arrangements, which our government is trying to roll out, if the woman is the one who takes on the flexible work arrangement, she's going to have less pay, and she will then be second-class citizen to her husband. So I think we need a broader change than that to have real equality, and that's a key concern for me.
I want to talk about equal pay in a moment, but just before we talk about that, it is quite interesting that before the pandemic or during the pandemic, economists were quite concerned about the woman's role and having to work from home. Everyone was isolating at home, having to do not only her job but also the kind of bringing up the children and schooling the children. But actually that's not happened, as Alex was explaining in his research, and Christina said were in her experiences.
Well,
sorry, Christina, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that this is a situation where children went back to school faster than people went back to the office. And so there was certainly a period of time where it was very, very difficult for women to do both. And you can see that in the dip in women working. But that changed relatively quickly.
Go on, Stephanie. You were going to say something also.
Yeah, I was going to say that I still feel in Singapore that the Asian mindset, the family expectation still puts those responsibilities squarely on the women. Singapore also has a quickly aging population. 25% of our population will be over 65 in 6 years in 2030. The women bear the brunt of looking after the older folk as well. And as the older folk are living longer because we've got better healthcare, there is a longer period when they are caregivers. So that concern is still very real to me, especially here in Asia.
Do you see a kind of attitude change, Christina, in the United States?
I do, absolutely. I think there's a recognition that flexibility has been very helpful, especially when it comes to a more inclusive workforce, but with limitations, certainly. And we're seeing that in some companies pulling back on the level of flexibility, but we've certainly made progress, and we're in a better place than we were pre-pandemic.
Should we talk about pay then as well? Because, I mean, well, one thing Alex's research didn't look at was equality in pay, but I just wonder what your thoughts are with where we are with that. Christina, how do you feel that it's going in the United States, trying to get some equality in pay?
I think there's certainly been a significant amount of progress there. I would say that there's probably more of a focus on better pay in particular industries, some of which have a large proportion of women in them. So I think, for example, of healthcare, how healthcare workers really bore the brunt of problems during the pandemic. And I think there's going to be more of a move towards ensuring that they have better compensation going forward. I could be wrong, but I suspect that's how we'll see a higher level or greater gender equality when it comes to pay.
And Stephanie, how are you on pay?
I was going to disagree with that, I have to say. I think that in Singapore, we have a lot of equality, so we don't have women who are discriminated against because of their sex, but because they have to stay home, they have more caregiving duties, as we described. Their progress will therefore be curtailed by that. Also, in recent years, it is the STEM jobs that have paid the best, right, in technology, etc. Most of the people who go into those courses of study are men, and 80% of the people coming out of those courses of study are men who go into STEM jobs, and those are the better paying jobs. So I'm very concerned that there is actually a rising inequality in the pay.
You mentioned the same thing as that. I just written down on my notepad, tech jobs seem very male dominated. How do we change that? How do we change that mindset? How do we get more women working in those areas?
Our country actually has a lot of support groups to encourage women to go into STEM and to make it sexy and interesting. I don't know whether that's really working. My other concern about the STEM job is if you've got a lot of men programming, like say AI and algorithms, then you're going to have a lot of unconscious biases feeding through into that, which is going to feed that whole gender inequality conversation even further down the road.
And we talk about diversity, don't we? Diversity in boardrooms, that you need to have a diverse boardroom in order to be a successful company. Christina, we've seen that kind of positive discrimination in the United States. Is that starting to have benefits? Do you think people are starting to see the benefits of that?
I think absolutely. There have been enough studies that underscore the need for diversity of all kinds on boards. That diversity of thought that comes along with it, it enables boards to make better decisions. So I think that certainly with some companies there is a long way to go, but again, we have seen some progress.
We were talking about participation of women in the workforce. In the United States, 75% of women are working and 90% of men. Stephanie, in Singapore, it's pretty much the same then. It's fairly comparable. I just wonder how we're going to get that 75% up so it's more comparable with that 90%.
I think flexible work arrangements certainly are useful. Singapore's a small country, so we could do something that is nationwide. Job sharing, for example. If a woman can only go to work in the mornings or can only go to work in the afternoons, we could have a job sharing scheme, particularly among the lower paid jobs that Christina was talking about, that needs to be more present in the workplace. we probably need to look at something broader based rather than just empower each particular woman to ask for flexible work arrangements.
And Christina, what do you think? How do we get that 75% up to more like 90% in the States?
Actually, I would argue maybe we don't need to. I think we want to have an environment where women have the ability to make a choice. And there could be times in their lives where they'd rather stay home or be very underemployed. And that's okay, too.
Well, thank you very much both for your thoughts on that. A really interesting discussion. We're going to move on now to Brussels.